Hey guys, welcome back to We Met at Acme. I'm so excited to be here with Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Hi,
Hi, Lindsey. It's great to be with you.
it's great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into it.
Well, professionally, I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and I've been working in the intimate relationship and sexuality space for over 20 years as a relationship educator. So I'm on faculty at Northwestern University, and I'm a practicing couples therapist, and I spend lots and lots of time taking what research shows us and what clinical wisdom teaches us and making sure that that gets translated well to the general public. That's what really makes my heart sing. So this is work I've been doing for over 20 years and I love it. I'm always learning.
I love it. And a question that I've been trying to ask everyone in the beginning, but I have a little bit of pregnancy brain right now, and usually I've been forgetting, but
Huge.
I'm remembering now, which is
Okay.
what is your favorite romantic gesture?
Oh my goodness. I think my favorite romantic gesture. So my husband and I just celebrated our 25-year wedding anniversary.
Congratulations, that's
Uh,
incredible.
Thank you. And I think my favorite thing that he does for me, I love it when he makes a plan. I think that as the work that I do is a lot of like caregiving. We've got two kids who are now emerging adults. And so I think a lot of my energy is around like thinking ahead, managing, all of that kind of meta big picture stuff. And so when he comes in, he's like, here's where we're going, here's what time it is, and here's the activity. It's like, oh, you get me. I love that sort of surrender to just tucking in to a plan that he has created.
I love that. And it's so funny. The other day, we asked these poll questions on our Instagram, and the other day, someone submitted a question that was like, do men ever grow out of the feeling that making a plan is the hardest thing that they've ever done is making a dinner reservation? And people were getting a kick out of it. But it's good to know that like your husband, likes to do that and he knows that it's something that you appreciate.
I really do appreciate it. Yeah. What can I ask you what yours is?
I really like when I mean, I love acts of service. And so when my husband like breaks down boxes for me, literally, like
Oh,
that is the best. And I also love when he gives me a foot massage.
okay. Especially with the pregnancy, I imagine that feels
Hmm.
like extra delicious.
Oh my God, it's beyond. Um, we have a few topics to dive into. The first one is an interesting topic because I feel like it can get tricky. And we've talked about it on the podcast before, but now that I am, imagining one day becoming an in-law to someone and having my own, daughter-in-law one day or son-in-law one day, I would love to talk about just the topic of in-laws in general and kind of, how to deal with it. I have most of the time, it's women who will complain about their in-laws, not really men as much.
Yeah.
Um, and like I wonder why that even is and kind of
Hmm.
um how to talk to your parent, like to your partner about their parent.
Right.
If it's like a red flag, if they're like, what do you mean? And
Yeah.
kind of like minimizing your feelings around their
Yeah.
parent, like what you can and cannot say to your partner about their parent and all of that.
Yeah. Isn't it so wild that like you have yet to even like meet this little baby of yours and you're already imagining like what it means? Like to become a
Hmm.
parent means to at some point in your life most likely become an in-law and like to have to kind of expand from I love this child to this child is becoming part of a we and now I got to figure out where to put myself vis-a-vis that we. Like it's really powerful. And I'm struck by two things. How little time and energy we spend talking about and thinking about in-law dynamics and two, how incredibly profound the impact is on a couple. I was just looking at some data that Forbes had of divorced individuals, and they were asking the divorced individuals why, what was the cause of your divorce?
Hmm.
And one of the very, very, very top things were family issues. And I think it's because we have this like romantic ideal that the relationship is just you and me. If you and I get along well, it's us against the world, like you're my ride or die, da da da. And we lose sight of the fact that no, actually, you are entering an entire system and your system is welcoming an entire new person in. And I don't think we spend enough time and energy thinking about and feeling about and talking about all of those dynamics, both the joining and the receiving. It's really pretty profound.
It's so true. And like, you know, I have spoken to people, like, for example, I have a friend who's dating a guy and his family is religious and she is not within that religion. And so his parents won't even like acknowledge her.
Yeah.
And she is thinking like, it'll work out. It'll be fine. You know, we'll get past it. And I'm like, no, it won't. If that's like their attitude already, because unless he is to totally like emancipate himself from his parents, which is very rare, especially considering how much we need and rely on our parents today more than ever, with just how expensive everything in the world is.
Right.
You know, you kind of have to be with someone that your parents approve of. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think about it as like when I'm sitting with a couple, for example, in therapy, I'm thinking about what are the ways in which the wind is in this couple's face and what are the ways in which the wind's at this couple's back. And to have family system support, you're right. It is a massive, massive wind at the back kind of a thing. It is huge. Does that mean that a couple is doomed for failure if they don't have family support? No, but it means that the wind's at their face. And I really, really would want them to be looking at who's their chosen family, you know, who else is in their network, because you're right. There's something incredibly pragmatic, you know, the pragmatics, there's the pragmatic piece of having support and the emotional piece of having support. And it's very hard. I mean, I think it can feel, again, pretty romantic. Like it's all I need is you and love conquers all. Like these are romantic ideas that we grow up internalizing. And there's an and the and is yes, love can conquer an awful lot, but it also is very hard to just be the two of you. That couples really do best when they're embedded in a network of support. So I would want for this, you know, your friend, I would at least be curious, like, to what degree is this family system open to welcoming in somebody of a different faith? What might that look like? Because there are times when, you know, an in-law from a different background becomes the catalyst for the family system to evolve, to grow, you know, to stretch themselves a little bit, for sure. But if what they're doing right now is holding their arms, hunkering down and saying, hell no, that is worrisome. And it puts him in a triangle, you know, sort of like him, his family of origin, and his future partner. And that's a very, very difficult and exhausting triangle.
And what about as a parent? Like, how much does it serve you as a parent if you don't like your son or daughter's partner? How much does it serve you to be clear about that versus to just let it happen and unfold? Because with that letting it happen and unfolding, you do have also that fear of like, what if they think that I approve of this? Right. And they just go for it. But when you're like disapproving, you have that fear of what if they cut me off?
Right. Okay. So you tell me what I'd be really curious your thoughts on this one also, but I think that it is a parent's job, like literally a parent's job, to notice and work within themselves on the reactions they're having about their kid's partner. That is first and foremost, because the way I know, the way that I feel about my kids, you know, partners is shaped massively about my own. It's shaped massively by my beliefs, my preferences, my projections onto my kid. We project left, right, and center onto our kids, even if we've done years of therapy the way that I've done. I mean, I've done years of therapy. And I have to be constantly in a process of managing my reactions about my kids' choices. And that's my job as a parent, is to manage my reactions about my kids' choices. And listen, we're not talking about abuse. If there's abuse, you know, or gross neglect or patterns of deceit, obviously those are things that need to have a conversation. But if you've got opinions about your kids' partner's profession or your kids' partner's appearance or your kids' partner's temperament, the first check-in is with yourself. And ideally, if you have a partner, then you're processing with your partner, like, hey, why am I responding this way? And that conversation happens miles away from your kid. You get your own shit figured out. May I swear on your show?
Yeah, of course.
You know, you get your own shit figured out. And then if you do choose to bring it up with your kid, you do it really carefully and really curiously. But I would say to err on the side of less is more. Just bite your tongue and notice your own reactions and get curious about why you're reacting the way you are. What do you think?
I agree. It's funny. My parents have always been supportive of partners of mine in the past that they might not have thought were best for me necessarily, but they've always been supportive and like let me figure it out on my own for the most
Yeah.
part. My sister, on the other hand, has been the opposite. Like she has made it very crystal clear when she doesn't like a partner. And I wonder like why siblings think that they can do that, but parents have all these rules to abide by.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, especially a sisterly relationship, right? I mean, don't you think so much of
Mm-hmm.
this, so much of the sister bond is like spilling the tea and breaking stuff down and, you know, looking at all the little iterations of stuff. So I imagine that there feels like more freedom in that peer to peer relationship
Mm-hmm.
and maybe competition. Like sometimes, I mean, I think this happens among friends too, right? When friends are critical of their friend's partner, I think that often comes from a place of insecurity or fear, right? Whether it's will I find somebody like that or just what happens to me? You know, if you fall in love and you head off into this relationship, what happens to me? Can I still be a priority to you? How much do I still matter to you? So sometimes a critique of a sister's partner may be an expression of like, hey, wait a minute, if you fall in love, you know, what happens to us?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. And with like with the in-law thing, and let's say that you like let's say it's reverse. Let's say that your in-laws like actually really like you.
Mhm.
But you don't like them as like the daughter-in-law or whatever. What do you do in that case? And like do you ever express it to your partner? Is that a safe
Right,
space if they're close
right,
with them?
right. I think again, I think care is warranted, and I would want the first check-in, like for that daughter-in-law, I would want her to be checking with herself about, okay, so what's my reactivity about? Why am I so reactive to my in-laws? What are my judgments? What do those judgments say about me and my beliefs and my hopes and my fears? Like, you know, maybe it's I'm disappointed that they aren't more like my own parents. And that's part of it too, right? If you're close to your own parents and you fall in love with somebody who does family life differently, we get very confused in our brains between difference and better worse. You know, like something that feels different automatically can start to feel worse. Like my in-laws way of doing things is objectively worse. So the challenge would be, okay, my in-laws way of doing things is different than my own family's way of doing things, but how might I have some compassion for it? Like they do
Mm-hmm.
it this way because of their experiences in their families or their own preferences. And what are the benefits of their way of doing it? So I would really want that daughter-in-law to be checking in with herself and challenging herself to look for the little hidden treasures in what are the benefits of the way that my in-laws do it. Because it is, the more that daughter-in-law can create generosity, patience, and curiosity about her in-laws, the better it is for her partner, right? Because we don't that like sense of being pulled in two different directions between my parents and my partner. It's such a painful place to be. So I would want her to be again selective, and if she's going to raise a concern, maybe to say, what can you tell me more about why your parents do it this way? Like, I get confused when your parents do this. Can you just tell me more about why they do it this way?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say that without seeming like, like a holier than thou, like I don't like the way that your parents do it, but
Mm-hmm.
that would be like in a perfect world where there's no like intonation, that would be the perfect way to say it, just like in a curious way.
In a curious way. And maybe in a like, the story I tell myself when your parents do this, the story I tell myself is that they don't respect us. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that's the right story. Can you give me some more context? Because your
Mm,
your partner knows these people, for their entire life. So your partner can give a context that isn't an excuse, but a context. Here's why they act this way. And
mm-hmm.
maybe the partner can then say, listen, I don't love it either, But what I do love is when we're with your family, it's so different. And that's really wonderful as well.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's normal that you like being with your family more than your in-laws, and that your partner likes being with their family more than
Mm.
their in-laws? Or do you think that it should be, all equal, or this or that, or it's natural because it's what we come from?
Right. I mean, I don't think it's ever going to be equal, and it doesn't have to be equal, but I for sure think that couples need to make agreements, that really honor both families.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's hard, especially early. Like I remember the feeling I had like the first Thanksgiving I spent away from my family. Like it is really strange. It's very strange to get to know somebody's family, to take time away from your family to go be with another family. It's definitely not easy, but it also is this thing where the more you do it, the more they start to feel like another family for you. It's like we have to have those experiences to build up that sense of connection. And like the fifth Thanksgiving together feels way more fun, and we feel way more familiar with the rituals and the rhythms than we do in the first one. So I want to normalize that. Of course, it feels awkward and clunky and sad also, those first times that we are away from our family, and what a like lovely privilege that is, to have a family that you love so much that it's hard to be away from them to go be with your partner's family. That's
Right. But
such
it's
a,
like sometimes you don't realize that you love them until you go to your in-laws. Like I have so
isn't that
many
true?
friends. It's so true. I have so many friends who, got married in the past few years, and they're like, I didn't realize how normal my family is, or how much, like, how just easy it is being around my family, until I had to be with my in-laws all the time. Like, and it makes you appreciate your family more. So maybe it's like a, you know, later in life feeling when you have that second family that
Huh.
you get to appreciate.
It's really one. Yeah, I think I hadn't thought of it that way. And it's such a great point. And where I want that person to land is just what you're saying, is like, I have this renewed appreciation for my own family. And I am proud of myself for the efforts I'm making to really step into my partner's family, like kind of
Mm-hmm.
holding on to both, not saying like, because it's hard with my in-laws, therefore it's wrong,
Right.
or but just to say like, this really is, I mean, it's like reason number 1000 that intimate partnerships are just such opportunities for growth, because even that, right, like that's a growing edge for somebody, is like, wow, by getting to know my partner's family, I have a renewed appreciation for my own family. Fascinating.
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it really is. So when you're wearing your couples therapist hat and you have a couple who is on a totally different timeline, when
Hmm.
are you like, this is never going to work, versus this is a disagreement that we could figure out? Like, for example, if one person is ready to get married, the other person's not ready for 3 years, I would personally say that's not going to work. But
Mm.
it's like, for example, my husband and I right now are looking into moving into a
Okay.
forever home. And he's very much dragging his feet. And I'm like, we gotta go, we gotta do this. Like, we have a baby on the way, like, let's go. And
Hmm.
he's like slower to make the transition to a place where, you know, we're settling down and not
Yeah.
anymore being in like the downtown cool vibe of the
Hmm.
city, right? Um, and that is annoying, and I want to murder him,
Sure.
but that I don't think that that's a deal breaker. I think we're going to get to a place where we find this great place and we both need it. But there are situations in relationships where I feel like two people being at different paces can be make or break. What would you
Hmm.
say are examples of that?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I want to do is, like, again, normalize that the chances of two partners arriving at the next commitment milestone at the same exact moment are slim to none, right? That's just
Mm-hmm.
not going to happen. One's going to be a bit faster, one's going to be a bit slower. And there's tenderness for both. It is not easy to be the one with your foot on the accelerator because it calls up all kinds of questions of, am I selling myself short? Am I settling? Am I wasting my time? That's not an easy place to be. It also, frankly, is not easy to be the one with the foot on the brake either, because it feels like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not more ready? Are they going to get sick of waiting for me? Am I a disappointment? It's really hard to see the disappointment on my partner's face. So I have a lot of empathy for both the faster paced partner and the slower paced partner. And the most important thing is it's why I refer to this situation as a pace discrepancy, because when you frame it that way, like all of a sudden right there, you've made it a relationship problem. And you open up the possibility then of the two people sitting shoulder to shoulder, looking together at the pace discrepancy, rather than what happens so easily is, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you ready? Or what's wrong with you? Why are you such a freak and you're ready and you won't slow down? So that's the first. So the framing, I think, matters tremendously. So viewing it as a relationship challenge. And you're right that there might be times where really it is a deal breaker, because what it speaks to is an underlying value, and if that's if the pace discrepancy is surfacing an underlying difference in their values, where one just doesn't value marriage, one just doesn't value stepping out of the city and getting super cozy in a suburb, then that's where I think it does become a deal breaker. But that's very different than, no, we're both looking at the same goal. We're just on different paces. And I think there's a lot of ways that couples, the problem solving gets truncated when the conversation is just, why are you going so fast versus why are you going so slow? So for you and your husband, like, I think the conversation becomes like, what would help you be more ready?
Yeah, but
and
let
him,
me but to clarify,
go.
not the suburbs, just uptown on the Upper East
Oh,
Side.
sorry. You're like, I'm still cool. I'm just heading a little bit out of the center of town.
No, but yes, no, continue.
So then I think you get to more interesting questions, like, what would help you? Like, what are the like miles? Like, what are the things we have to hit to help you be more ready?
Right.
Or what are you afraid of? Like, surfacing the concerns. What scares you about the move? Because the thing we know for sure is every single milestone brings up grief. Everything you step into highlights oftentimes what you're stepping out of. And so part of it, I imagine, for both of you, and then it becomes shared. Like, I imagine for part of you, or for both of you, there's like a shared grief around the end of this chapter, of downtown life, or whatever the symbolism for you has been about living where you've been living, and so there is like the grief and letting go. And so maybe, if he's holding all the grief, but you're holding all the possibility, then it's like you're missing the chance for him to say, no, I'm super excited about uptown. And for you to say, no, I'm actually also really sad to let go of downtown. I really have enjoyed, this time.
And the grief thing is so real.
It's so real.
I also feel like, and I'm curious what you think, like, how legit is it when a man will say something like, oh, my career isn't XYZ yet, so I'm not ready to take this next step? Because I have seen it be an excuse for sure. I had a friend who was dating a startup guy, and he was like, once we, get our next round of funding, I'm going to propose. And, that came and went so many times. And then, eventually they broke up. But then I've seen it be, more legit. Like, in the case, we'll use the same example of moving, like, of a partner being like, well, I thought that I would be, here by the time we moved, and I don't feel like I'm there yet. So I want to be there if we're going to move, type thing. So how do you know if somebody's using something as an excuse to not take the next step versus like it's a legitimate thing?
I think it's such, like, you've got your finger right on the pulse of something I think is such a huge issue. And I think especially like for straight couples, there's no, every heterosexual relationship exists against the backdrop of patriarchy and all the ways that men and women are socialized to determine their self-esteem. And
Right.
how do men determine their self-esteem? They're taught that their worth is in their sense of being a provider, their ability to be a provider, which is in some ways the biggest bullshit, because when you look at the data now, in straight couples, in one half of couples, she out earns him. So, and that's like brand new. That's like not that long that we've been at that point where it's like 50-50 who earns more, like for
Right.
a lot of history in terms of, parents and grandparents and how they were socialized. It was like, his income was the income, or was the primary income. And so I think when a man says, I'm not where I want to be, I think he's saying something about, I know my essence and my worth, at least what the culture has told me, is around my ability to be a provider. And if I'm not a provider in the way that I think I should be, in the way my dad was, in the way my grandpa was, I don't know how to show up feeling really proud. And that's hard because sometimes he can't get out of his own head, because she might be saying, dude, look at my income. Like, I've got this. It's not really, I'm not waiting around for you to get to a certain place, because
Right.
we're fine. What you provide to me is about so much more than your income. It's about our sexual connection. It's about our friendship. It's about the adventures we take together. Like, I'm not waiting on that, but it's really hard, I think, sometimes for her to get louder than all the shit inside of his head.
Mm.
So I think where the rubber hits the road is, what's the degree to which he's checking himself and like holding up that mirror and doing his own exploration of, why do I have this belief? And if he's not curious at all about why he has that belief, what it means, ways in which he's maybe selling himself short by that, then yeah, it's a huge risk to ask her to wait around and cross her fingers, because whether it's consciously an excuse or not, I think, consciously, if they're using that as an excuse, that's just like super shady. That's like really crappy. If they're, that's deceitful to be like, no, wait around one more round. That's deceitful. But I think sometimes it isn't even conscious. It's just what it feels like is how it has to be. And so if he is not willing to examine that belief, then she is for sure taking a risk, because I don't know how that belief, goes away on its own. What do you think, though? Tell me.
No, I agree with you. I feel like, obviously it's a different time than when our parents were growing up, but like nothing stopped them. Like they all had like no money, they had
Right.
nothing, they, forged ahead, they had babies, they got married. And I just feel like it more often than not can be an excuse, but
Yeah.
then it can be real. I think the realness depends on like how they were raised. Like if they were raised in like a scarcity way with money, like, we can't do X, Y, and Z until, this money comes in or whatever it is, then they're probably not going to feel comfortable taking the next step. But if they were raised in a way that was like, we'll figure it out, we're going to make it work
Yeah.
no matter what, like as long as we have each other, then that I feel like would give them a different outlook on moving forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's right. So another place where we would want this couple to be looking is looking at each of their families of origin. Like, what were the beliefs around money that you grew up with? What were the beliefs around money that I grew up with? And so that might be kind of like operating in the background, and the couple's not talking about it. And it might be, I think that there's ways like that. It's again about like family support too. Like, are people giving this couple messages like, you shouldn't, get married until you reach this point? But you're right that there's, it used to be historically that a couple, it's why couples register for like forks and spoons and towels when they get married, is because they are starting a home together. Well, the vast majority of couples now have had homes and they've got their own forks. They don't need to be registering for forks and spoons. But it's because marriage is now, there's this sociologist, Andrew Cherlin, who says that marriage is now a capstone instead of a cornerstone. Like, marriage is oftentimes now the last thing that people put in place. So then I think it's hard then, if you're waiting to feel fully like an adult, fully settled. Like, when are we ever, especially those of us who are drawn towards entrepreneurship and startups, you never, ever, ever feel done. So I think you're right that it has to be like a commitment to figuring it out. Okay, so your startup isn't where you want it to be. All right, well, let's get married. And it's not going to be where you want it to be, whether we're married or not married. So we may as well be in
Right.
it together, and keep growing together. I think there's so many people who are on these like really creative entrepreneurial endeavors, and you never like, where the hell is the finish line in those? So at some point, and the thing we know, the research has shown again and again and again, is it's the quality of relationships that makes for a happy life. So it's someone who's chasing like this career milestone is actually not setting themselves up for a life well lived. They're better off really investing in their relationships, and obviously working on a career, because that's important, but investing in a relationship is what's going to help people be happier anyways. So
And
for
more
someone,
successful.
yeah, for someone to like miss out on a great intimate partnership because they haven't gotten their next round of funding, I'd be like, what are you doing? What are you
Yeah,
doing?
that's
Don't,
ridiculous.
yeah, that makes me feel sad.
I was out last night with a friend of mine who's turning 35 in a few months, and she is single and she is dating. And she and I were having a conversation about like, she will find like little things about the guys that she's dating, and it's over. Like she, is done. And we were talking about my friends who have been with their partners for a longer time, like since the early 20s and mid 20s. And I was saying to her, like, if she met some of the guys that my friends married, she would be like, oh, hell no. But I think the fact that my friends found these people, like my other friends, had found these people so young, like you have like a dispensation for their issues and their faults, whereas like when you're dating in your 30s and you are a fully formed human, you have zero tolerance for someone not being exactly what you envision them to be. And I was telling her like that she needs to be a little bit more lenient, because like that's almost impossible to do to herself in dating, because everyone's gonna have like their shit. I'm curious if you and like how you would combat that as someone dating single when they're who they are already, and trying to find someone on that level instead of giving them some grace for having issues and stuff. Like I have a friend whose husband lost his job, and that sucks. But he's her husband, and they're gonna get through it. Whereas like if she had met someone now dating who lost their job, she'd be like, oh, goodbye.
Yeah. It is, I mean, it's such a double-edged sword, right? That she knows herself so well. She's so independent and self-sufficient. Like that's a beautiful quality to bring into a relationship, is that she's not needing a partner to complete her or to settle her or to support her. She doesn't need that. But there's a way in which it becomes this like sneaky thing where, because she's self-sufficient, it really is what she sees first and foremost are the risks she would have to take, and the accommodations she will have to make in a partnership. And so I think it is, yeah, I think she will. I mean, there's a cool opportunity in offering more grace to a potential partner. She might be able to offer more grace to herself. Like, what are the ways in which she might be really hard on herself, really perfectionistic about herself? Like forgiving and allowing for less than perfect in a partner may give her an opportunity to kind of cut herself some slack too. So that's one thing it might open up. Then I also would want her, like maybe just like even like on a piece of paper, to write down like the inner circle of like things that I really, really cannot abide, like the absolute deal breakers. Like I just won't do X. And then the outer circle is like, these are the things that maybe I don't love, but I could imagine making some wiggle room around. And then looking at like, why are these things in the middle circle? Like, what do they say about my values and my beliefs? And then these things in the outer circle that maybe I might be able to challenge myself to work around. Like how might she grow? How might she grow with a partner who isn't as rigid and pristine about exercise routines as she is? Like how might that be an asset actually, that she gets to be kind of the hottie who's really into fitness, and her partner is maybe not quite there. So that might be a really fun dynamic for her to be the one who takes the leadership on that, or who is really celebrated for her physique and her dedication to fitness. Like there's always, whatever we're accommodating or allowing for, there might be like a little hidden gift in there or like a benefit to the relationship, you know, for somebody who's not quite as X as I am? Like, what does that bring to you and to your life?
That's so true. I'm going to make her listen to this.
Okay,
Um,
good.
we have some listener questions. Somebody had asked, how do you know if your new relationship is progressing at a normal level or if it's too slow?
Yeah. I mean, it's such, there's a psychologist named Bernice Newgarden who, like, I don't know, in the 80s or 90s, put out this idea that, you know, we talk a lot about having like a biological clock, but we have a social clock, and we so much determine our sense of normal, on time, off time by looking to the right and the left, like looking at our peers and what they're doing.
Right.
And so it is, I mean, even in that question, right? They're saying, am I normal? And we are very, very, very afraid of being abnormal. Like, too soon isn't easy, but feeling too late isn't easy either, you know? And I think feeling like something's not progressing fast enough. I think there's a deep fear of like feeling like you're wasting time. I think where the rubber hits the road again is like, can you turn to your partner and check in about where we're at?
Mm,
As long as you can be open about those conversations of where have we been, where are we now, and where might we go next? If you can have those conversations, it's much easier to tolerate a quote unquote slower timeline than if you are terrified to bring it up, or you bring it up and they roll their eyes and do a here we go again. That's where it's really hard, right? As long
yeah.
as there can be conversation, then I think you can feel relaxed and just enjoy where you are now. You know, so often we're like, I know I'll feel relaxed when we get to X milestone. And it ends up being this like thing where we like put our happiness in the future. And
Mhm.
I want this person to be able to savor what they have right now. But that's probably too big of an ask unless they're able to also look at that person and be like, how are we doing? How are you feeling about us? How am I feeling about us? What are we doing? As long as it can be an open conversation about it, it's easier to tolerate that you're maybe going, quote, slower than your friends.
Yeah, I agree. Communication is key. Someone asked about how to keep the spark as you age if you've been married for 30 plus years.
My Lord, I feel this one. This is um yeah, because the spark isn't, you know, it may be like in the beginning that it's really easy to have lots of what sex therapists call spontaneous desire, where you just have sex because that person is there and they're cute and you're feeling it. But over time, you know, what the research has shown is that it's pretty normal and common for desire to shift. And so then couples have to be actively cultivating desire, you know,
Hmm.
actively creating the conditions. And that means knowing what are the things that I need to be doing within myself and doing with you to help me feel open and ready for connection. That's part of it.
Hmm.
And understanding what helps your partner, like what helps your partner feel, you know, available for connection. And that might not be the same things, but that's a really interesting conversation. Like, when do you feel most interested in being sexual with me? You know, what shuts you
Right.
down?
Hmm.
Um, and lots of, I think novelty is really important for a long-term couple. Like those things where you have an experience together where you're both kind of on shaky ground, you're doing something you haven't done before, you're going to a place you haven't done before. Like there's nothing like novelty to kind of spark desire. And of course, if desire is being compromised by deeper issues, then it's a wonderful thing to bring to a couples therapist.
Yeah, that's true. Couples
Mhm.
therapy, huge fan. How do you rebuild trust with yourself if you have a history of breaking your own promises?
Oh, first of all, I love the self-awareness in that question. You
Right, me
know,
too.
it's so huge. I mean, I think the first thing I would want that person to do is figure out a really thick, compassionate story of why they have broken their own promises.
Hmm.
And versus like, I break my own promises because I suck. I break my own promises
Right.
because I'm a liar. I break my own, you know, promises because I'm broken and damaged as a person. No, no, I don't buy it. You know, not interesting. what gets in the way? What is it that gets in the way when you make a promise and don't deliver? Like that's the question that therapists love. It's called a constraint question. Rather than being like, why did I break my own promise? You ask, what kept me from honoring my promise? It's a
Mm,
really different way of coming at it. What kept me from honoring my promise? Then, like, you start to look at what are the blocks. And it might be that this person is making promises that nobody could honor. They're way too perfectionistic. They're way too self-abandoning. So it may be that the problem is this person is setting themselves up for failure because they don't have a reasonable sense of what they ought to expect from themselves.
right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, yeah. What do you think about that one? That's an interesting
I
one.
think I think it depends what kind of promises we're breaking and talking about. If it's like drinking related, then
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's, you need help beyond yourself. If it's dating related, like you keep texting them first when they should come to you, um, you know, if it hasn't been working, why, like ask yourself why you're continuing to do it. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like self-sabotage at that
Right.
point, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you really actually want it to work, because if you do, then you would commit to trying something different. But it's
Mm-hmm.
it's easier said than done. Like it's all about willpower in
Yeah.
every instance, I feel.
It's also it's all like the dating, like the example you had about like if this person keeps texting somebody that they don't want to be texting,
Mm-hmm.
and with the actually with the drinking one too, there needs to be like as Aristotle says, nature abhors a vacuum. Like if you just say don't do that, it's not going to work because then you're just like white knuckling it. Okay, so what are you going to put in there instead?
Right.
Instead of alcohol, what are you doing instead? Instead of texting them, what are you doing instead? Like fill that space, right? Rather than just like
Mm,
gripping the wheel so tightly and hoping that you don't break a promise again. No. Like what else? Like create bounty around it, like
I
bounty and
love that.
distraction and other stuff. I think that's really, really, really important.
I love that. Okay, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions.
Oh Lord. Okay.
If you're 29 and older, would you start dating someone who you weren't sure you could see yourself marrying? Yes or no?
Yes, because it seems unrealistic to expect on date number 1 or 2 or 3 that you can imagine that future. It takes time and experience to know. I'm not saying wait forever, but I'm saying give it a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, give it a hot minute.
It's interesting because all of the yeses are men and all of the nos are women.
Oh, all the when you ask this to guests,
What?
what do you mean?
Like everyone who
Oh,
said
this is a
yes.
poll. This is a
Yeah,
poll
yeah,
you
it's a
did.
poll question. Yeah, everyone who said yes
Oh,
was a man, meaning like, men will date whoever, whenever, even if they don't want to marry them, versus women are
that's
not, messing around.
fascinating. Yep.
For those married or in a long-term relationship, were you infatuated right away with your partner, or did those feelings grow?
Are you asking for me personally?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No, the feelings grew. He was my best friend in college, and then we had some beers and kissed, and then I panicked. I was like, "Wait, I can't date you, you're my friend." And I pushed and pulled him for so freaking long because I loved him, but I didn't know. And he's shorter than me, and I was like,
Mm,
how can I be with someone shorter than me? It took me forever to figure it out. And then I was like, if I don't know right away, it must be wrong. And so it took me a while to figure it out. And God love him, he was patient. He's like, all right, get your shit together. I'll be here.
I love it.
Was it right away for you?
It
Your
was right
husband?
away for me, but
Yeah.
it's so different. And like I think both situations, yours and mine, are, still amazing relationships. I do think that when the man takes longer to know, it can be a little
A
iffy, but
100%. I
yeah.
agree. I agree. You're right. I think that and for a long time I was embarrassed to share Todd and my love story because I
Hmm.
felt like it was somehow we were less than because it wasn't instant chemistry for me.
No.
And what research shows is that lots and lots of couples, like I think we make a hierarchy of love stories. If it's not like instant fireworks, somehow it's not, meant to be. And I think that there is, there's lots of ways, like lots of beautiful ways that people fall in love, the slow burn and the fireworks, et cetera, et cetera. And there's not better or worse. But you're so right about the gender piece for straight couples, as if she's
Yeah.
feeling like she's waiting around for him to figure his shit out. That's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very
Agreed.
hard. I'm not doing good with the rapid fire. I'm not helping you.
No.
Here we go.
We'll just
Rapid.
do a few more. When in a new relationship, when does bickering start to happen? 1 month, 5 months, around a year?
I would hope it's not 1 month. And bickering shouldn't ever. I want people to treat bickering as a problem. Bickering's a problem. It means there's something you got to figure out about why are you not. I mean, obviously people get snappy, but that it shows there's something going on in a relationship. I think usually people say it takes about a year for like deeper patterns to emerge, but I want people to not tolerate kind of snippiness.
Yeah, agreed.
It's consistent, you know.
Agreed. Is it necessary to make your future brother-in-law or sister-in-law your bridesmaid groomsmen?
Oh, I mean, I would say that if it keeps the peace, you know, like I think sometimes these things, I think there are ways that we do need to accommodate, not sell ourselves out, not self-abandon, but be gracious and be strategic for the sake of peace. That is part of being in a partnership. That's part of joining a family system. And so, you know, and to really, really get clear on what are the hills you want to die on. And there are so few hills that are worth dying on. So if having the brother-in-law in the groom's party makes everybody happy, it makes the day go more smoothly, suck it up. Suck it up, buttercup.
If you and your significant other are about to move in together, is it normal or a bad sign that you've started arguing a lot more?
Yeah. Well, around transitions, like transitions are highly, highly, highly triggering. Like they activate so much stuff inside of me, inside of you, and in the space between us. So bickering around a transition makes sense because it's also stressful. And moving in together is a freaking, I think that, I mean, that was the low point of Todd and my entire relationships when we moved in together, like 2 years before we got married. It was awful. I hated that transition. I would not wish it on anybody. And creating a home together is really triggering, right? Because people have ideas about like where things should go and who should have what role. And so I would normalize that some amount of bickering and stress makes sense, but it also means that means couples need to be working even harder on taking time out, coming back, having conversations, like learning all those relationship skills so that you are like putting the wind at your back and, you know, doing as best a job you can around the transition. But that's a biggie. It's a hard transition.
All right, last one. What do you think is more important in a fulfilling relationship? A sense of camaraderie based on similarities between you two, or a sense of empathy for the differences?
Oh, empathy for the differences. For sure.
Yeah.
Camaraderie matters, but sameness is not a prerequisite for intimacy at all. And in fact, those differences are growth opportunities. It's all we were saying before about the in-law stuff too, right? Like a different way of doing things isn't necessarily a worse way of doing things. So then having empathy for the differences is so good in terms of like growing us as people. Then when you become a parent, you know, and you're parenting somebody, this little person who's so different than you. So it's like the practice grounds for what you're going to have to do as a parent anyways, you know?
That's so true. This has been amazing. Thank you so much. So much. I feel like there's so much tidbits, so many tidbits of amazing wisdom in here. Before you leave us, can you leave us with a quote or piece of advice that we can take from you or that has helped you throughout the years?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I guess I will go with my favorite. So relational self-awareness is the through line in all of my work. It's about continuing to look at our own reactions to stuff. And so I think one of the most important skills is to check in with yourself about how am I showing up in this conversation with my partner? Like, how am I coming across? I think it's so easy, especially for those of us who grew up feeling pretty invisible when we were little or feeling like our voice didn't matter, to underestimate how much power we have to shape a conversation, to shape an interaction. And so keeping yourself in the ring and really noticing, what's my tone? What are my words saying? Like, am I inviting closeness? Am I shutting down closeness? So that check-in, not to make yourself feel guilty, but just to be a little bit in awe of how powerful you are and how much you shape the dynamic.
I love that. Where can everybody find you, follow you, and potentially work with you if you're open?
Yeah. So my website's a great place to go, DrAlexandraSolomon.com. It's got links to my social, which is dr.alexandra.solomon on the Instagram, and I have a new book coming out, and all the information about me, my courses, my books is all on the website. I would love to connect with folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra. Have a good
Thanks,
one.
Lindsey. Thank you.